This Wednesday, we are going to begin the season of Lent. And the traditional reading for the Sunday prior to the season of Lent and Ash Wednesday is always the Transfiguration story. The story of Jesus going up into the mountaintops and having this mystical experience up there on the top of the mountain. And for centuries, scholars and academics and incredibly profoundly holy people have tried to understand what the meaning of the Transfiguration is. You can go back if you are a biblical or churchy nerd and read all sorts of commentaries from 2000, 1500, 500, yesterday, these commentaries, and people struggle to come up with what the Transfiguration is actually about. So when I have nothing, and when you have no idea what I'm trying to say to you 12 or 13 minutes from now, know that I stand on the shoulders of giants. That as I try to make sense of the Transfiguration today, and I fail miserably, that I stand in good company. So Jesus, on that day, the scriptures tell us, went up the mountain to pray. Now, Luke has told us on a number of occasions that Jesus went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. And I truly believe that the phraseology there could also apply to Jesus going up to mountains or lakesides or riverbeds to take an opportunity to step back for a moment and take some personal time for prayer. So the first thing I think that we can take away from the Transfiguration story is that whenever we are about to enter a time of discernment or a pivotal time of crossroads in our lives, we can follow the example of Jesus to take some personal time away, to be in conversation and meditation and discernment with God, listening to what God is telling our hearts and our minds, that as we decide what direction to go in our lives. This isn't the first time that Jesus has gone up a mountain to pray, or separated himself to go to the lakeside and to be by the Sea of Galilee, or has gone down to the Jordan River, or has escaped into the wilderness to commune with nature and with creation and with God. And each time that a pivotal moment in his life, from beginning his public ministry to calling the disciples, to turning his face towards Jerusalem and walking that lonesome valley, we see Jesus going up to discern, to spend some quality time in meditation, discernment, and prayer. Maybe you have a time in your life coming up. Maybe you are at a pivotal junction. Maybe you find yourself at a crossroads and you can't figure out which way you would like to go. May we follow in the example of Christ this day and spend a little bit of time removed. Because the daily grind is excruciating sometimes. And the phone and the TV and the computer can make you more tense, more stressed, more anxious. Those aren't good things to help you decide. Those aren't good emotions to help you decide which way you ought to go. As we have often been told, turn the TV off and go outside and play. Because it is good for what ails you. Even this past week, NPR and many of the media outlets, even though I just told you to turn off the computer and the TV, anyway, released a study saying that those people, young people who spend a significant and consistent amount of time in green spaces, whether they be in Balboa Park or Mission Gorge or the Grand Canyon or up on the mountaintop in Flathead Valley at Glacier National Park, young people who spend a significant and consistent time in green spaces grow up to have a better sense of self and have a better grasp of their own mental health. So maybe Jesus goes away into the mountaintop to discern and to commune with God and with nature because of the ancient wisdom that when we spend time grounded in the blessings of creation, it calms the spirit, and it is a balm in Gilead for the sin-sick soul. So maybe that's what really the Transfiguration story is all about. But I think maybe there's some other things in the Transfiguration story that we can take away this day as well. Because this time, Jesus not only goes up to the mountaintop by himself, but he takes his friends with him, Peter and James and John. And as they hike up the mountain, 1,200 feet in elevation to get to the top of the mountain, once they get there, the scriptures tell us that they're overwhelmed with sleepiness. I think probably what happened was when they got to the top of the mountain, they pulled out of their pack that amazing manna from heaven that is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, which has been in your pack for the past 3 hours, and through the heat of your body and the movement of the pack has sort of become this conglomeration of bread and peanut butter and jelly. And when you eat it, oh my goodness, the heavens open to you. But it will make you want to take a nap just like that. So as they sat there at the top of the mountain and they drank their water and they ate their peanut butter and jelly sandwich, after this strenuous hike up to the top of the mountaintop, the scriptures tell us that they wanted to take a nap, but thank God that they stayed awake, because the blessing and the gift that they received was tremendous. They saw not only that Jesus was transfigured into glorious and amazing light, but they saw standing next to Jesus the personhood of Elijah and the person of Moses. Now, again, if you're a church nerd and you go back and look at the ancient commentaries, one right after another will tell you that these two people are actually symbols. That Moses is a symbol for the law and Elijah is a symbol for the prophets. But I think we actually do these two people a disservice by making them a symbol and a metaphor for something else, because their actual humanity and personhood and story is so much more powerful to me. Why were they on the mountaintop that day with Jesus? Why Moses? Why Elijah? Moses is the lawgiver, but he is more than that. He is the leader of the Exodus. He had a mountaintop experience. As he was going through the daily grind of his day, shepherding the flocks of his father-in-law, he felt a draw and a pull to go up the mountain, and he heard the voice of God say that this is holy ground and that I have a special purpose for your life. But that special purpose for his life came with a great deal of anxiety and a great deal of responsibility. For when he came back down the mountain, he was not only going to be the lawgiver, but he was the one who was going to lead the people of Israel out of bondage, break the chains of oppression through the Exodus story. So he is literally the liberator of the Hebrew people standing there next to God, or standing there next to Jesus as they commune with God on that mountaintop. When he experienced the epiphany of God through the burning bush, his face glowed with glory and light. And so I feel that he probably is there because he can relate to what it means to be the leader of a people, to carry their weight on their shoulders, and to be a person who's going to break the chains of oppression and of bondage, so that people can live in the way in which God wishes all people to live, which is in freedom and in liberty. So maybe Moses is there because he can actually relate to what Jesus is going through. Secondly, why is Elijah there? Well, Elijah is often thought of to be the prophets of prophets, the greatest of all the Hebrew prophets. And maybe he is supposed to just be a symbol of all the prophets that came before Jesus. But again, I think his personal story is even better for us to dig into and to see why he might be there. Elijah was the prophet who was the harbinger of the Messianic age. He is the one who came to say that at some point God will send a person who will come and reconcile us into a community of human beings in the one human family, and will reconcile us to God and redeem the world. But Elijah also, as being a mouthpiece and a prophet of God, had come to see all of the hardships. He was so frustrated by looking out at the people and seeing the corruption and the bigotry and the misogyny and the abuses of people and the greed of people to only care about themselves and not care about others. And when he spoke up against this way of living and these behaviors, those in the powers that be put a hit out on Elijah, and his life was in danger. And so Elijah actually went up the mountain to resign. Elijah went up the mountain to say, please, God, take this cup away from me and hand it to someone else. I can't do it anymore. How many of us in our daily lives, in our grind, have gone up and wished to commune with God for a moment, to just tell God, I quit? And so as Elijah has his mountaintop experience, going up to the mountain to tell God that he no longer wishes to be a prophet of God, he hears God's voice in the still, small wind and gentle breeze saying, "Do not be afraid. I am always with you." So maybe the Transfiguration story is reminding us that we are also to work for the work of liberation and freedom, to bring people out of bondage so that all people of the world and in our lives can live in the way in which God wishes all people to live, with liberty and freedom. Or maybe it's the story of us going up and communing with God and saying, "No, be steadfast, have courage, stay the course. I am always with you." So maybe Elijah and Moses understand what Jesus is going through. And we don't get an opportunity, according to the story, to know exactly what they talked about. I'm imagining they talked about more than just the weather. But the only hint that we get in the story about what the topic of the conversation was is that they talked about Jesus' departing. And here's an opportunity. I feel that those who are the translators of the English translation of the Bible really missed an opportunity. Because that word that gets translated into English as departing, which is a fine translation, it's not a bad or a wrong translation, but there's another word that they honestly could have chosen, which I think would have spoken to the special connection that Moses and Elijah have with Jesus in this moment, and would speak to the foreshadowing of Jesus going down the mountain to walk that path to Galilee, or to Calvary, to the cross, to the tomb, and eventually to the resurrection. And the better word might have been Exodus. That they were talking about Jesus' Exodus, which would take place in Jerusalem. That as Moses led the people of Israel out of bondage of Egypt and through the Red Sea to the promised land, that Jesus, through the cross and the resurrection, is freeing us from the bondage and of the oppression of our brokenness, of our sinfulness, of our hurts, and for the ways in which we interact and behave with one another. So maybe Jesus is showing us in the story of the Transfiguration is teaching us that when we have a pivotal moment at a crossroads, we should step back and commune with God. Or maybe the story of the Transfiguration is telling us that Jesus was having a very special moment and was being encouraged to live into that work of God of liberation and freedom, and to not give up, because God will always be with him as God is always with us. But whatever the moment was, it must have been dope. Because when he experienced it, Peter had this amazing idea that he ought to build tabernacles or tents, so that mystical experience could be housed inside of it, and that any time that people wanted to go up that mountain and experience Moses and Elijah and Jesus at the mountaintop, they could, so they could plug in and refresh and reboot and get updates so that they could carry on with their lives. But Jesus, when this happens, Jesus turns to Peter and says, "Brother, you are missing the point." Mystical moments of magic and mystery cannot be housed in buildings. They are things that are gifts that God gifts to us in our lives, and that we can go back to and savor in our memories and our experiences, but we cannot, regardless how hard I am working right now, cannot make you relive it in any way, shape, or form. It is a special gift between you and God. And I bet if I invited you to close your eyes and to savor a memory of a mystical moment of mystery, you would feel joy and bliss and peace and hope. This is where we find the Transfiguration. In our hearts. these special moments where God shines, the glory of God's love and grace into our lives. For the daily grind is hard, and the work of liberation and freedom is difficult. And times we stand there in the presence of the mountaintop, and we want to say, God, I give up. But through the transfiguration, we hear through the cloud of the witnesses of God, through those who have gone before us in history, coming forth into our midst and into our presence to tell us that we are God's beloved and that we are never alone. Fear not. When I was 22 years old, I was a senior in college. And I had been accepted into American University, where I was going to go to the graduate school and work in foreign diplomacy. I was going to learn Russian and help in that post-destruction and the dismantling of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Iron Curtain to bring the United States back into good relations with Russia. Aren't I glad I didn't go into that work? And yet, the closer that the time came for me to go to American, the more it just didn't feel right. And so I did what a lot of confused young men at a crossroads in their lives do when they're trying to figure out what is the right path for them to take. I went home and I talked to my mom. And I hopped up on that countertop in my mom's kitchen in the house that I grew up in San Antonio, and I poured my heart out to her. And she said to me, "We're going to go to church on Sunday," which sounded like the most idiotic thing in all the world, because I hadn't been to church since I was in second grade. Why would I go to church to figure out what I wanted to do and what my purpose in life was going to be? So we decided that the next Sunday that we were going to go to church. Now, my parents grew up Presbyterian, which means that they did everything decently and in order. And every Presbyterian knows that church starts at 11 a.m. So she decided that we were going to go to church at 10:45 so that we would be 15 minutes early, because that's what good Presbyterians do. But somehow, between second grade and senior year in college, the Presbyterian Church decided to move their start time of their worship service from 11 a.m. to 10:30. And so when we showed up at 10:45 thinking we were 15 minutes early, we actually were 15 minutes late, and there was no way that a good Presbyterian woman was going to walk into services 15 minutes late. So luckily, there was a Methodist church down the street who started at the time that was correct, 11 a.m., and we walked in 5 minutes early. Now, being a child of a Presbyterian family, I had never been confirmed. And so when the time came for communion to be served that day, I had never received communion in my entire life in the 22 years of all the days of my life. And I tell you, sisters and brothers, I don't remember a single word from the minister's sermon. I don't remember a song that was sung. I don't remember a prayer that was lifted. What I do remember, what was a mystical moment of mystery for me, was receiving the bread and the cup for the very first time at the communion table at a United Methodist church. The minister that day came to the table and he said, "This table is not the table of Northwest Hills United Methodist Church. This table is not the table of the United Methodist Church. This is the table of Christ. And any and all who wish to commune with God through the bread and cup of Christ are welcome to do so." And for a moment, I was transplanted to the mountaintop. And I heard the story of God's work for liberation and freedom of all people so people can know their worth and dignity and that God loves them unconditionally. I was transplanted to the mountaintop where I was having a crossroads, a discernible moment in my life where I didn't know where to go, and I heard direction, and I received discernment. And I had a mystical moment at a mountaintop where I wanted to give up, and God said, I am always with you. Do not be afraid. You are mine, my beloved. I got that through the receiving of bread and through the partaking of a cup. This was my mystical moment of mystery. It's mine. Through 18 years of professional ordained ministry, I return to it again and again. Some of you have heard the story now 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. Some of you are hearing it for the very first time. I lean on it and I go back to it constantly because it fills me up. It refreshes me. It reboots me. It recharges me. It gives me updates so that I go back down that mountain to work for Christ, to heal, to help, to liberate. I can do so knowing I am not alone and that I am beloved, just like you, just like you, just like you. So this is not Kensington Community Church's table. This is not the table of the United Church of Christ. This is the table of Christ. And any and all who wish to come and share in this meal and commune with God are welcome to do so.